Hello! So today we are going to talk about a very large topic, so we will just be dabbling in some of the edges of it, but it is in what ways is equality for women, particularly things that are focused on business, maybe your girl bossing, going into a male-dominated field, etc. In what ways does that equate equality for women with becoming more like a man? I've always hated that phrase, but in some ways I do think it serves a function here. So I just kind of want to get into some of the recommended changes that I see for women's behavior. There are obviously infinite amounts of these. There's advice on how to dress, how to act, body language, verbal language, just all kinds of things. But most of the advice that I have seen recently has focused on women being more assertive, specifically in verbal language. So we're going to talk about that, and I have a book recommendation. So generally, I just see things that basically boil down to women need to take control, don't use filler words, don't let your sentences have an uplift at the end, don't use vocal fry, stop apologizing for things, don't phrase things as questions, and then some slightly more behavioral changes like refuse to take notes or suggest that someone else take notes for meetings and take credit for your stolen ideas. These are all things that I've either heard directly as advice or I've seen online. And here we turn to the book Word Slut, which was recommended to me by my Instagram friend Tiasha. Definitely check out her Instagram. There is an entire goldmine of content in this book. I'm just going to kind of gloss over it because at some point I would just be reading you passages from the book continuously. Can't recommend this book enough. But one of the things that she spends a lot of time talking about is kind of debunking the idea of these timid female speech patterns that you hear about so often. Pop culture has kind of long told us that there are things like hedges, words like I mean, just, that these are signs of uncertainty and of seeking approval in women. But in fact, not only do men use most of these words just as much as women actually use most of them not as a way to express uncertainty, but as a way to open up communication, get buy-in, welcome feedback, and establish a trusting relationship. So it's not just filler words or hedges that have this. Pretty much any speech pattern that has been stereotypically associated with women has a similar backstory. The pattern is used for a very specific purpose, typically indicating empathy, openness, and willingness to work together. It may be worthwhile if you are a woman who is trying to establish a really firm boundary with someone and you are accustomed to using these things to maybe cut them out for a specific conversation because you know that they are perceived this way. But that doesn't mean that we should cut them out entirely because they are being perceived this way, especially because we know that men use them just as much, and it's not perceived that way. So it's not actually about the words at all. It's about the fact that men don't respect women, and they naturally perceive anything that women do as timid or alternately as bossy if they cut things like this out and are more assertive. If you need to tell someone to fuck off, then yeah, don't dilute it with any of these words. But in general, we should be valuing these things. According to the studies that she talks about in this book, women have a horizontal speaking structure based on taking turns, reciprocity, supporting each other, whereas men have a vertical hierarchical conversation structure. It's based on authority and perceiving someone in the conversation as the expert. One theory is that women developed this structure and this greater empathetic ability because we are expected to do most of the emotional labor in the world. The author of this book writes about this. This argument is inspired by Janet Holmes, who suggests that our society requires women to be the emotional laborers, shoulders to cry on, carriers of sympathetic burdens. So when women get together and talk to each other in a horizontal style, you're basically looking at a bunch of people all navigating these expectations at the same time, doing a damn good job of it, and enjoying the reciprocation. I think it's safe to say any woman who's ever experienced genuine empathy and solidarity of another woman knows it's a pretty satisfying feeling. It is generally thought that this is not a biological difference in the ability to empathize between men and women. It's only once they start feeling the pressures of our patriarchal society that they stop being emotionally vulnerable with each other, which in my mind indicates that this is a healthier conversation structure to have. Certainly anecdotally in my own life, I have witnessed the differences between male friendships and female friendships in their supportiveness, in their openness and vulnerability, and the amount of benefit that it actually brings to people's daily lives and emotional health. Men depend on the women in their lives, typically their partners, to do most of their emotional labor. They suffer greatly mental health wise if they don't have this person to do that for them, because they have no other social support from their friends or other community. We've departed a bit from our workplace conversation here, but it does all connect. Now, first of all, in my opinion, these things won't work. In general, I think that women being more assertive is not perceived positively. And so if you are working in an environment that's already disrespecting you, I seriously doubt that making these changes is going to be perceived well. You might get your way slightly more often, but you're also going to probably be perceived as someone who doesn't fit the work culture, or someone who's not a team player, or someone who's abrasive. Not that I care about those things, but it would undoubtedly affect your advancement opportunities, which is kind of what this whole thing was about to start with. But also, my bigger problem is, why on earth should women have to do this? Why on earth are we telling women to abandon their potentially healthier speech patterns in order to adopt these other speech patterns that, quite honestly, I don't see much enviable about? In no way am I saying that women can't naturally be assertive. A lot of women are naturally assertive, and most of those have learned to tone themselves down in order to be socially acceptable. And some women have learned to be more assertive, and they love that role for themselves, and that's great. But women shouldn't have to be working on themselves to be more or less assertive in order to be taken seriously in the workplace or in their personal lives. Why are typically male speech patterns, or more accurately, speech patterns that are perceived as more male, considered the correct way to behave? Why not instead tell men to value women's speech patterns, if not telling them to adopt them, instead of having all these infographics and speeches and everything telling women how to be more assertive? Why are there not these same resources telling men how to be more open to feedback, how to empathize with people, how to not steal ideas, and how to give credit to people who came up with something, how not to interrupt people, instead of telling women how to deal with interruptions and how to take back credit for their ideas as if it's some unknown entity doing this to them. On a more sinister note, why are there these detailed and, quite frankly, traumatizing lists of ways to keep yourself safe as a woman, instead of teaching men how to leave women the fuck alone and how to create a culture among their friends that would make that kind of behavior completely unacceptable? So a lot of this discussion is about what men need to do, and I want to make it very clear that I am not saying that men need to rescue us. Women do not need to be rescued. Things that are viewed as a minority's issue should in fact be the majority's issue, such as women's rights should not be a women's issue, it should be a men's issue because they are the ones who made it an issue. Racism should not be an issue for Black people to tackle, it should be an issue for white people to tackle, etc. So all of these rules and norms that have been created by and are upheld by men, why on earth would that be a woman's issue to change them? You can give women all the coping strategies that you want, but nothing's ever going to change. For one thing, we know that no matter how much women change their behavior, it still isn't welcome. Women can't perform femininity or masculinity perfectly. If they act super feminine, that's perceived badly. If they asked super masculine, that's perceived badly. You have to navigate this exact balance, and even then you're going to have issues. So this is clearly not something that women can behavior change their way into fixing. The blame never should have been placed on women's speech to start with. So yes, I don't know how coherent of a topic this really was, but it was just something that was on my mind and I wanted to discuss it. Semi-related, I have to recommend the Instagram page, A Man Who Has It All. Absolutely love that. It just really flips gender conversation and stereotypes on its head, and it's hilarious. Yeah, let me know what you think for sure. I would be really interested in having a conversation with you guys in the comments. I will see you next time, and thank you for watching.